Hello to all subscribers and listeners of this channel. You are listening to Obsidian Radio, and this is Why Evolution is Bullshit Part 5, Final. Ultimately, evolution is. So, you are now listening/watching the final installment of the Why Evolution is Bullshit series, and I say again, for what may be the last or near the last time, evolution is a hypothesis masquerading as a theory that people believe is a fact. Again, while I can't say for sure that evolution does not exist, I can question the validity of its evidence. And I can say that I need better evidence than what has been provided to be provided before I can accept it as a valid explanation for how different types of organisms came to be on this planet. We've come to the final leg of this journey, a series that questions the validity of the so-called evolutionary theory. Here I shall summarize major points that have been stated in this series so far. Maybe not every point, but only the major ones. As well as ask those of you with a clear mind to practice the scientific method in the correct way. The way you're supposed to practice it without dogma, but with facts, with evidence, and a clear thinking mind. The final chapter in this series. So then, let us finish this. 1. Far as I can see, evolution was a mistake made by Charles Darwin and others. And scientists actually do make mistakes quite often, so this really isn't that far out the realm of normal when you start looking at what scientists are supposed to be doing. Quite a few scientists are right and quite a few are wrong. Charles Darwin was one of them. Ultimately, Charles Darwin was a scientist from the mid-1800s to late 1800s who tried his best to understand the world around him, and he tried to push his ideas as best as he could. But there were flaws. 1A. There was a lot of science he was not aware of just yet. Things like DNA had not been discovered, microscopes were not advanced enough, the fossil record was not advanced enough either, etc. 1B. There were technologies that had not been invented yet, or had not been as advanced as they would have been decades later, such as the electron microscope, radiography, digital imaging, computers, CGI, computer modeling, etc. 1C. Darwin and a few others began questioning or even challenging his own ideas towards the end of his life. And many more scientists challenge and or find issue with the evolutionary theory to this day. And I will have a link in the description, some of what's been said by other researchers, scientists, scholars, etc. Most of Darwin's theories came from studying domesticated animals, not just his observations of life on the Galapagos Island when he was traveling down there on the Beagle. A lot of people misconstrue that. Most of his studies came from what was around him where he lived, not just when he traveled. 1D. Many of his contemporaries pushed his ideas, Huxley, Galton, etc., but they were just as misinformed as he was, given the maturity of science and the scientific method and the level of technology that they had at that time. Again, mid to late 1800s. 1E. Much of the research that's been done over the past 150 years or so has actually done a good job, I think, of challenging Darwin's theories consistently rather than reinforce them. It's safe to say that Darwin was limited in his research and his findings, as well as the fossil record and many other observations, weakening the hypothesis over these past 150 years or so, not strengthening them. Number 2, evolution has turned into an aggressive ideology that attacks anyone else that doesn't agree with it. This can be witnessed very easily by evolutionists who snobbishly attack and ridicule anyone and everyone that dares challenge the idea of evolution in species, such as, or so much of evolutionist talking points can be summarized as 2A. Being arrogant, quite arrogant actually. 2B. Assuming that counter-evolutionists are religious. I am not religious. in any way. 2C. A lot of evolutionists use very silly ad hominem attacks. 2D. They demand that a person is somewhat credentialed from some of these overpriced universities, which makes no sense. Science does not demand that you come from a university. It just demands that you observe things, run experiments, come to some conclusions based off of the evidence and the results of the experiments. That doesn't really require a whole bunch of degrees and certificates from universities, but that's what they demand for some reason. 2E. Repeating what they've been told without actually explaining the theory at all. A lot of evolutionists do this. 2F. They ridicule and or are into silencing anyone that disagrees with the idea of evolution. Again, this is not scientific minded at all. None of this is based off of science or fact. This all comes across as a group of people who follow an ideology based off of what they believe. And they don't seem to be basing it off of actual science or critical observations, unfortunately. Number 3. What does this mean? This means that ultimately, we still don't know how life either came onto this earth, onto our planet, or how life became so diverse on Earth. 3A. We don't understand where the first species of living organisms actually came from. We only speculate and then call that settled science, quote unquote settled science. 3B. We don't really know how life became so diverse, yet we hold on to ideas of how it happened. We defend it dogmatically and then call that also settled science, quote unquote. 3C. We don't know what actually occurred in order to bring us, Homo sapiens sapiens, into existence. We don't know what that is. Yet we pretend that we know, and then we call that, quote unquote, settled science. We human beings do this because it's comforting, not because it's correct. Many in the scientific community are supremely uncomfortable with the fact that we don't have all the answers. We don't know how all this happened. On the other hand, I am comfortable with that fact. I'm comfortable with the fact that I don't know where all this came from or how it all started. I'd rather admit to not knowing this rather than assume that I do know the answer. It's much healthier overall to admit we still don't know or to admit that we don't have the answers than it is to cling on to quote unquote answers to the questions that feel comfortable to us, that feel right to us. That's not going to help us go forward. Absolutely not. Number 4. What do we know about life on Earth? We know quite a few things. We know that life exists. We know that Earth has life. We know that life is diverse and that life on our planet is doing whatever it can to exist and to continue its existence on our planet. We know that we're here, and we know that there is a purpose for the existence of all things we observe. We just don't know how or why. We also must begin to admit what we don't know. Science was one of those first institutions that refused to punish people for not knowing something. It was the religious that punished people for either not knowing, having the wrong answer, or not pretending to have the right answer. Number 5. Fear of the unknown. We'd rather pretend to know than admit that we don't know. Human beings seem to be terrified of one fact. And I'll say it again. And that fact is that we don't know where life came from or how it came to be so diverse. We only speculate on life's origins and its diversity. But none of those speculations have proven anything. All we know is that life is here. And it appears today that modern science has gone down a particular path. And that path is, instead of inviting inquiry and discussion, modern science or scientism seems to be about university, funding, popularity, groupthink, and punishing anyone for not going along with the crowd. A sad state indeed for what is modern science, or what some would call scientism. Number 6. What should we do now? Here's what I think we should do. We need to go back and really learn and observe for ourselves what is in front of us. We need to cast away the shackles of academia and disconnect from the horde that falsely believes in their own intellect. We actually need to follow the scientific method, present ideas or oppose existing ones, observe what is in front of us, rely on our observations, evidence, experimentation, reproduction, measurement, and facts. We must not rely on feelings, hypothesis, or a hierarchy of academia for the answers to our reality, or to an understanding of our reality. Doing so is a fool's errand that will bring us onto a path of delusion, serious delusion. A fool wanders further from the truth while believing that he's on the right path. The wiser person, the wiser one, gets closer to it only because he's aware of how far he is from discovering the right answer. Think about that. Number 7. How do we go about learning about our world in an objective and non-biased way? By becoming a critical thinker. Question everyone's ideas, including your own. Don't focus on authority or majority anymore. Focus on what makes the most sense based off of what you can see, what can be observed, measured, reproduced, etc. Also, instead, focus on whether the statement makes logical sense or not. Again, a reliance on facts, evidence, observation, experiments, measurements is the right way to go. Number 8. Evolution has not been shown to exist. The evolutionary theory is not very solid at all. Basic info about physiology will be more than enough to make it impossible for anyone to defend evolution as an actual process of life. Also, the fact that, again, it has not actually been observed. It can't be observed, but allow me to explain. So, if we're looking at 0 and then 10, 100, and then 1,000. Let's say these are each, points or measurements, some algorithmic scale in your mind to show what do you need to disprove and or challenge the theory of evolution. And if someone tells you all you need is a 10, something on level 10, not 100, not 1,000, but on level 10, to disprove or to challenge evolution very effectively, then we have something as simple as physiology. Physiology would be a 10. We just studied the different anatomies and structures of different organisms through the fossil record. It's very easy to see that there's no real transition going on the way evolution states. When we look at things like biochemistry, that's 100. It seems like it's 10 times more challenging to the evolutionary theory than physiology when you understand different biomechanical or biochemical things that have to occur in an organism that cannot possibly be seen in the fossil record anyway. Then the last one at 1,000 would be genetics. Genetically, we're not seeing enough signs that organisms actually change from one species to the other. There's no genetics that actually shows that. So let me break it down. Physiologically, we're not seeing enough evidence of any morphology in any organisms slowly changing from one form to the next. The fossil record does not, and most likely will not show any transitional organisms within the different layers of the Earth's strata or the Earth's crust. Now we're on to 100. Biochemically, there's no way evolution could possibly even occur when one considers the complexity of certain body parts like livers, stomachs, kidneys, swim bladders, hearts, glands, skins, etc. These body parts are so incredibly complex, yet they're so common throughout the animal kingdom, and they're so necessary for any organism to survive. Organisms cannot survive without these body parts, yet there's no explanation as to how something biochemical or biomechanical like a stomach would have formed in the first place. Then we're at 1,000. Then there's things like the genetic flaws, or genetics and how it makes evolution not make sense at all. Genetically, we are not seeing enough evidence of species changing over time to become unrecognizable species. genetically, as in their gene code does not seem to change. They may adapt to a different environment, but they're still the same species of organism. There's nothing changing on their genetic level where they're unrecognizable genetically from their ancestors. If there's anything like that, it's not been shown. Not one person has shown the genes of any organism changed in a way that makes later generations of that species genetically distinct from their predecessors. No one has been able to show that. And if they say they can, I would suspect they're being delusional. Number 9. Science and other disciplines do not have to be diametrically opposed. Today's science, modern science, seems as if it wants to be at war with spirituality, ancient belief systems, mythology, etc. I do believe that this is a mistake. When looking at the reality around us, we must not make the mistake, the arrogant mistake, of ignoring any other possible explanations for phenomena in our world around us. Sometimes the answer is staring us directly in the face, but it is our modern day arrogance, our modern science, that blinds us to the answers to many of Earth's mysteries. A good example of this is the Moai of Easter Island. Now, I'm going to make this brief. The native people of Easter Island specifically state that the Moai somehow walked or were walked to their final standing positions. Modern arrogant scientists dismiss this as a myth and or made up nonsense by stupid primitives, as they commonly do. Except some people a few years ago were able to replicate how this walking Moai might have actually been done, and I have it linked in the description. And to this day, the people of Easter Island stand by their idea that the Moai were walked into place. And it looks like that might actually be true. Ropes, certain pulley systems, a large team of people, certain engineering on each of the Moai statues, it all makes sense that they actually could have been walked. Again, you'll see in the video linked in the description what I'm talking about. There are hundreds of examples of this, of modern science denouncing something that comes from a non-scientific discipline, only to have science then prove or at least suggest that what the native people, what the mythology, what the ancient teachings were saying might actually have been correct. How many more times are scientists going to arrogantly dismiss alternative ideas from mythology, the ancients, indigenous traditions, etc., only to have those tales proven true and correct, or at least shown to be somewhat plausible? Science needs to expand in order to allow historical record, myth, indigenous legend, etc. to become a part of the evidence needed to help us understand reality. No longer should we be focusing on condescendingly looking down on the other disciplines out there that are not deemed scientific. That mentality needs to get done away with. It's not helpful. It only makes people more ignorant and keeps people locked into certain ignorance that helps no one learn. Science needs to evolve, ironically, and stop being so incredibly arrogant and narrow-minded. It needs to stop being the enemy or the competition with or the rival of belief, mythology, and or spiritual teachings from around the globe. It needs to mature. In conclusion, A. The scientific method is flawed. Too much of today's scientific method has been infected with modern belief, dogma, arrogance, and a hierarchical system of academia. A rigid old guard that won't let go or admit that they might be wrong. B. Evolution is a theory that has too many flaws. Evolution has holes in it, and has holes in its theory that no one seems to be able to address except for attacking non-believers very aggressively with the same old overused tactics over and over and over again. C. Evolution fails at explaining human origins. We most likely did not evolve from a common ape ancestor. Where we came from, no one truly knows. A lot of people don't want to admit that, but that's the truth. We don't actually seem to know where Homo sapiens sapien actually came from. But I do know evolutionary theory tries to explain that, but it fails at that. It fails to answer that. D. Common mistakes / characteristics of evolutionary debate. This has been outlined in earlier parts of the series. Once understood, anyone getting into the debate about what evolution is will do well to avoid using these tactics. Again, check out the videos earlier in the series. E. And finally, what evolution has turned into and why it hurts scientific inquiry. Evolutionary theory and its followers have turned into a cult-like structure that's controlled by a rigid closed box, orthodox thinking. It has corrupted the scientific method when it comes to exploring the origins of life on our planet. And it has unfortunately done a disservice to the rigors of science. People have become followers of a hypothesis masquerading as a theory, and they believe that it is a fact. When in reality, we should become inquisitive, open-minded, yet skeptical and objective when it comes to what we observe and what we're trying to learn about our current reality. There really shouldn't even be a mainstream science versus alternative science. The very existence of these two shows us that we have learned nothing from our religious counterparts, who many of us openly condemn for being blind believers. An authority declaring a science to be settled, and a person blindly accepts that declaration of quote-unquote settled science, is not science at all. It is blind belief. It is a modern-day version of faith. Where does humanity come from? Where did life come from? How did life become so diverse? We don't know, but we need to be honest with ourselves if we're going to figure all this out. Until then, we can speculate and or learn as much as we can. And that's it for this series. Hope you all enjoyed. If you can, please rate, comment, subscribe, and donate to support this channel on my Patreon page. You'll see a link to the description. You all have happy holidays. Happy New Year. I'm out. That's all. Peace.